Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. So we are 1 day away from the NFL draft, as of recording, about 30 odd hours away from the first round of the draft, kicking off 1 AM over here in the UK, 8 PM over in the States, Eastern time, I believe. Probably wrap up over here around half 5 AM. Which is absolutely fine because I booked this weekend off work every single year, and this year I've even decided to book a flight about 4 hours after the time the draft finishes. So it should be quite entertaining to see how the end of that draft and me rushing to the airport goes. But we'll wait and see. Hopefully it will be a good trip to the airport and on the plane, not thinking about what on earth the Browns did with their 2 first-round picks this year. And speaking of what they might do with their 2 first-round picks this year, my final conversation with NFL draft expert, and I do say that and I do mean that, Jack BRENTNALL, talking about what he thinks and his kind of ideas on what the Browns should be looking to do with their 6th and 24th pick. You know, also giving my thoughts as well, having a conversation about the Browns and those 2 first-round picks, where they should look to go, etc., etc. Should they go offensive tackle, wide receiver, BPA, in what order? All of that. We talk about all of that. Obviously, I tried to poison the well a little bit, see if I could get Jack on board with what I wanted and where I was going, to give some more credit to my take, shall we say. Whether or not I was successful, you'll have to watch and find out, but I won't waste any more time. So please enjoy my last discussion with Jack. If you haven't already, go check out the previous 2 videos that I did with him, where we talked about day 2 and 3 prospects, targets for the Browns, as well as the top of the offensive tackle and wide receiver classes, before we had this discussion, just to get Jack's unbiased and objective view on these guys before we went into, as I said, this discussion about what the Browns should do with their 2 first-round picks. So please enjoy this discussion, and go make sure you check out where to follow Jack and the amazing work he does as well. Enjoy. So moving on to the part where, as I said, I will maybe try and poison the well a little bit, and that is what you think the Browns should do here with their pick number 6 and pick 24. And just to kind of lay the context here for me and where I've kind of been on it, which is that I feel like picking at 6 in this draft is a bit of a poison chalice anyway, because I feel like you're just outside of that spot for maybe like the top 2 or 3 guys, and that's when we start getting into the value game of, and especially positional value, if that's what you want to do as well, of, well, are these guys worthy of this pick? So with that kind of in mind, I suppose, the way that I've kind of looked at it and the way that I've come to the conclusion of, like, if we are going to, not to say that this is what you should do, but if you are going to do the whole kind of, well, I want to target offensive tackle and I want to target wide receiver, for me, I've just always kind of felt like the gap between what tackle you could get at 6, or maybe let's just say, if there was a trade back scenario where Dallas, or so you go back to 12 or something, I just feel like the gap between the player that at offensive tackle you could get at 6 versus 24 is bigger than the gap between what wide receiver you would be taking at 6 and what wide receiver that you could then maybe potentially get at 24. And the main reason being for that is that I think it's more likely we get a run on tackles in the teens than we get a run on wide receivers. And whether that's all to do with how I think that the depth and stacks up with these classes, but also to do with the teams picking within that range. You've got to obviously take into account the real life scenario of, well, what are the teams actually picking in between your picks, and what are those needs? And I kind of look at all of that and I think, well, if you are going to do this tackle versus wide receiver game, it's just made more sense for me to go tackle first, wide receiver second, if you do want to try and maximize value. That's not like one of those things where I'm saying you have to do that. It's not, that's just what my preference would be if that was the case. There's plenty of combinations that I could do of these tackles and wide receivers together, whether that's at 6, 24, 12, 24, whatever, that I would be really happy with. But just in that kind of vacuum of, okay, if we are just doing tackle 6, wide receiver 24, or wide receiver 6, tackle 24, I just think the value there is better at offensive tackle. What's your thoughts on that kind of viewpoint that I have there?
Yeah, it's an unenviable position, I think, for the Browns this year. And I don't think it's just the Browns. I think anyone in that kind of 5 to 8,
Yeah,
9 range, it's a tricky time. I think the optimum scenario, if it's available, is a trade back.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you've got to hope that somebody is available at 6 that maybe teams didn't expect, and maybe the team like Dallas is willing to trade up, and maybe one of
yeah,
those two edge rushers is available. Um, the challenge you've got for the Browns is the guys that I would say are the kind of blue chip guys in this class are at positions the Browns don't need,
yeah, yeah,
or they're at positions that I think it would be negligent to take when
yeah,
you have needs at other
yeah,
premium positions. I mean, Jeremiah Love's brilliant, but I mean, one, you don't need a running back, and two, I'm not taking one when I've got needs at other premium spots. So I would, if all of these guys are available at 6,
yeah,
I would take Tate
yeah,
because I think if I look at my next tackles, it's Mawanoa, it's Miller. Mawanoa and Miller obviously both play right tackle,
yeah,
so there would be more shifting around. If you're comfortable moving Tyson Howard back over to the left side, then maybe I could see taking Mawanoa. You've just got to be really confident if you're taking him that he is definitely a tackle,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
because you don't want to be spending 6 overall on a guard unless they're Quentin Nelson. Um, I think if if Connell Tate is gone, then I'd be going tackle,
yeah,
um, because the next receivers on my board, Lemon and Conception, I wouldn't take them at 6. And assuming again a trade back is not an option, so I think it all depends on whether Tate is there for me. Um, I think 24 is going to be a really odd one because you've got teams like the Lions at 17, obviously you've got the Eagles. Chargers, I don't think will take offensive tackle, but they might see one of these guys and move them
yeah,
inside.
yeah.
So it is a tricky one. What would be interesting, and I don't know what like the Browns view of this is because I've not seen this anywhere at all. But like, say that a Ruben Bain or a David Bailey is there at 6. Obviously, the Browns have Miles Garrett, so they have the best edge rusher in football. It's not a major need. But outside of Garrett, there's maybe not lots there, and he is 30, I think, or
Yeah,
approaching
yeah,
30.
yeah.
Would Edge ever be on the cards there, do you think? Or do you think it will be wide receiver or tackle?
With Andrew Berry, everything is on the card, and I think that is why as much as I can get caught up in this whole offensive tackle, wide receiver stuff. Which don't get me wrong, I'll be very surprised if there's not an offensive tackle and wide receiver two within those first four picks, shall we say? I would be very surprised, but Andrew Berry is not. I mean, this is the same guy that traded back and took Mason Graham last year after signing Malik Collins in free agency. No one really expected that. And after calling Travis Hunter Otani, he went and did that. So maybe some people might look at him calling Carnell Tate a trapeze artist and think, well, maybe that's a similar situation where he's trying to get someone to bite on Tate because he's got his eyes on someone else. Obviously, we'll find out. But with Andrew Berry, you never know. But I feel like with Browns fans, if that was the case and that did happen, I think a lot of people would go, are we trading Miles Garrett? Obviously, I don't know if you saw. I think it was last month they made a couple of tweets to the contract, which I'm a big salary cap guy, a big contract guy. That makes no sense to me, other than the fact that you would be trying to trade him. So maybe, I mean, people have tried to argue to me that it's flexibility down the line. Well, it's like, well, you haven't actually moved any of the money really. You've just kind of made it easier if that was the case. So I feel a lot of people would probably then start worrying. Someone like me, I mean, don't get me wrong, as much as I want playmakers, as much as I want an offensive tackle, I'm never going to get caught up on, drafting good players. And it's obviously why, as I've mentioned, but Caleb Downs, obviously another person that some people might bring up as
Yeah.
well. And it's like, look, I'm going to be in the moment. If Tate was on the board, if Mawanoa was on the board, if Freeland, who I'll get into very, very high on, was on the boards, and they went and took a Bailey, my initial thought is going to be, well, kind of what are we doing here? But then I
Yeah.
think, you kind of let that calm down. You get into the next week, and you're going, well, we just drafted arguably one of the better edge rushers in this draft. So it's one of them for me where it's like, I'm not going to absolutely hate it, but I do think a lot of fans, and I will include myself in this, it's gotten to this point now where we've passed on tackle, we've passed on wide receiver with premium premium capital so many times now that it just feels like whether it's a reach or not, it just feels like at one point you've got to invest that capital into it. And you look at offensive tackle. I had a little dive into it. Only 11% of offensive tackles that have been all pro selections since 2020 came after the top 10. And that is
Wow.
just, and when you look at these top tackles, how do you go and get a top tackle? You draft one in the top 10. That just seems to be
Yeah.
the only,
And
not
they're
the
never
only.
really in free agency.
And they're never in free agency, because if
Yeah.
you have a top tackle, you're never going to let them go. And I kind of made this joke to someone in another video we did about this, where I was like, you might get the best wide receiver in the league. Tyreek Hill was the best wide receiver in the league. He's been traded once and cut once. You
Yeah.
don't see that with the tackles. So that's where it's kind of like, I can understand. But then obviously it goes back to, but then is there any blue chip tackles? Obviously, if Membu's in this draft, yes, it's just obviously if Membu's there, you draft Membu. So it's just one of them things where I'm not going to be like, throwing everything around, going, I hate the Browns. We should, if they went and drafted a David Bailey, if he was there.
Yeah.
But I do, I do share the sentiment of a lot of Browns fans, where it's like, look, we've got to invest this capital, premium capital, into one of these positions. We spent a top 5 pick on a defensive tackle last year. As much as I love that, and as much as I love Mason Graham, I think it's time that we invest this capital into one of those premium positions. So that's why trade back is the best case scenario for me, because as you said there, the Browns, arguably the Browns might be in a position, and same with these teams that are in 6, 7, 8, maybe 5, that they might be getting a worse player than the Chiefs and the Bengals at 9 and 10, because the Chiefs and Bengals feel better about taking the safety. It's one of them things where it's like you could actually be in a worse position being here at 6 versus being there where, people aren't going to shout at you for taking a safety at 6 or whatever.
And the teams that, if you maybe move down to a kind of 12, I don't think that just off the top of my head, I don't think the Commanders are taking a tackle. I don't think. They might.
Yeah.
They might take a wide receiver. I don't think they'll take a tackle. I don't think the Saints will. The Chiefs, I don't think will. Bengals, their offensive, they've got their tackles. I don't think they'll take one. The Dolphins probably, or could do. But like, you're not looking at a situation where it's kind of, okay, we trade back 6 spots and, oh my god, all those guys are gone. Which is, I think if that's an option, I think, like you say, that's the one where you just, as soon as someone picks up the phone and says we want to trade, for pick 6, you're like, yep, cool, we'll do it. And even if you only get back, I don't know what that would cost. Normally, it would probably cost quite a bit from 12 to 6, but even if you only get, I don't know, another day 2 pick, or a day 2 and then a late day 3 pick, 100% do it, because. Like I say, it's a draft where there's a kind of big bunch of guys between that kind of 20 to 50 range where they're all kind of muddled up together. So more bites at the apple's not a bad thing.
Yeah, maximise value, and a lot of people, that will argue the difference, in the Brown side for me will say, well, let's stop trading back and just take the best player available. But as we just kind of said, is the player that you're going to take at 6 actually the best player available? If we are going to do the whole best player available stuff, you end up with a team with a roster as bad as the Browns, with an offensive line that's been as bad as the Browns has been, taking a running back at 6, and that's just, as you said, it's just in the position they're in, it's inexcusable. So that's why you do. I'm all BPA to an extent. You don't just take a tackle for the sake of taking a tackle, but there has to be some kind of positional idea brought into it. And as you kind of said, that's why the trade back's the best case for me, and that's why the trade back with Dallas is just. Would be the dream. If you could get 20 off them, then and I wouldn't even ask for anything. If you could get just 12 and 20, I don't think they would. We'd probably have to throw in. I don't know if I'd want to throw in 39, because I don't think the value matches there. But I'd happily throw in 70 if they gave up 12 and 20 in that scenario. Pick up another first round pick, and then if you are kind of caught up in this offensive tackle, wide receiver stuff, you could do that and then still have a pick spare to maybe take in Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, who obviously has been massively linked to the Browns with obviously the interest that they've had in him. So, trade back scenario just makes so much more sense to me, and you maximise that value. Does maybe the Lions jump you, like today, jump you at 11 and come and take the tackle that you wanted? Maybe, but I think I'm willing to take that risk, as you said, with the other teams there, that I just don't think those best guys are going to go. And the reason why this has made the most sense for me, the most of this process, is that I love Monroe Freeling. I am just so high on Monroe Freeling. I have this one offensive tackle every year that I get as high on. Monroe Freeling is the guy this year. Membu was the guy last year. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's Membu. He's obviously not on the same caliber as a prospect as Membu. But last year, when everyone was screaming and shouting about Will Campbell, I was pretty steadfast on Membu being the best offensive tackle prospect in that class. And not to say that that means that I'm right about Monroe Freeling, but I just look at a guy like a Monroe Freeling, and as I said, not quite to the extent of a Membu, but maybe a late riser towards the end of the process, came in, tested absolutely off the charts, has all of the physical traits that you want. And I've just seen countless examples the last few years, even I'd probably kickstart that with Tristan Wirfs in 2020, where you just get these guys that came in, they would click, maybe they didn't have the production as maybe the other top guys in that class. Jed Wills that year, obviously with the games that he played at Alabama, obviously Will Campbell last year compared to Membu. But I could just so easily see being the best tackle in the class if all things go right. And I feel like Freeling for me is, and I'd probably even throw Max into this as well, and I'm saying Max because I can't pronounce his last name, as maybe the only true tackles that I think could actually then, the upside is unlimited, where I feel like they could become maybe a better player at their draft. Don't get me wrong, the floor is obviously lower than maybe definitely a Mawanoa, a Fanu, who I really like Fanu. It would have to be a trade back scenario for me because I just couldn't do it at 6.
No,
I just feel like there's too many concerns. But with the athleticism, I would happily take a flyer on him at 12. But yeah, that's just why I'm so high on Monroe Freeling. So just to kind of, as I was saying, that's kind of why it's been like, well, if we do go at 6, we do go at 12. I feel like I could go Monroe Freeling at 12, or, I mean, I'd do it at 6, but I understand that a lot of people wouldn't, but that's just how high I am on him. Or a Mawanoa at 6. And then if KC's there at 24, I feel great about that. If Cooper's there, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't feel as great, but I feel pretty decent. I feel like I'd feel a lot better about that than if we took Tate at 6, and then Max is gone, Caleb's gone, Freeling's gone. I mean, Blake Miller might even be gone. And then I'm kind of sat there going, oh, now what do I do at tackle? So that's kind of where I'm on it with that. But, as you kind of said, I don't think anyone, I don't think many people are going to argue against drafting Tate just because of, I'm not, as much as I've been caught up in the draft wars of like, I've got my guy Monroe Freeling, I'm having the banter with the Tate guys. I'm of course going to be happy if we take Tate. But just to kind of round up those other things that I said, Caleb Downs, do you think you can take him at 6? Do you think that's plausible?
I think you can. Whether you should is the question. I mean, I've got him as the 5th overall player on my board, so I do think he's worth the pick. I think he is the smartest safety I've ever scouted. But if, like I say, if you're assuming that one of Tate and your OT1, whoever that may be, is there, I'd struggle. I'd struggle with it because I think if you're a team that doesn't have needs at those kind of premium spots, then maybe. But like I say, the safety class, I think there's talent there on day 2, or late in the first, obviously at pick 24. It'd be one of those. I love Downs. But I think it's one where I'm like, I'd rather swing for the fences at a position that's got a bit more kind of impact value. Because if that does hit, whether that's Tate or Freeling or Mawanoa or whoever it might be, that's huge. Yeah.
And I think for me as well, I mean, I'm an Ohio State fan. Obviously, Caleb Downs, I love Caleb Downs. If they drafted him, as I kind of said with the edge rusher stuff, maybe after a week, I'm like, look, I've got Caleb Downs on my team. Like, it's hard to be mad about that when, add that to this defense. But as you said, just with the value, with what the Browns need at the top of this draft, and with also, as I kind of mentioned there earlier, the interest that they clearly have in EMW, and how kind of maybe he projects into the NFL as one of these kind of more modern day safeties, as these kind of hybrid safeties. And how that could fit in. then obviously, yeah, I just feel like you just can't do that at 6. And that's why, as I said, I mean, the dream scenario for me, and I think for most Browns fans, is that if you can get that trade back with Dallas, you can get 20, whatever it costs you on the other side. You're then looking at 12, 20, 24. And for what, for where I have these tackles, wide receivers stacked up in this draft class, that just makes so much more sense to have those 12, 20, 24 picks to attack those two positions than it does 6 or 24. Because as we both said, maybe 6 is too high for some of these tackles. Maybe 6 is too high for some of these wide receivers. You don't really have any of those concerns at 12. And yet, as I said, maybe the Dolphins jump you. Maybe the Dolphins love Monroe Freeling, and the Dolphins, the Dolphins, or maybe the Lions love him and they jump up for him. Okay, I'm more than happy taking Fanu at 12. I'm more than happy taking Mawanoa at 12. Someone like yourself would obviously be more than happy taking a Blake Miller. Do you then, or Blake Miller at 20, Caleb Lomu at 20? It just gives you so many more options. And then, as I said, you can use that extra third round pick to just go pure BPA. Maybe that's EMW or whatever, and you can kind of fill that need. So, as I said, trade back the best case scenario. If there's 2 players that you think is realistic realm of possibility that if the Browns had to stick at 6 and 24, who would they be for you? I mean, I know it was Tate at 6, so who do you think you could then get at 24?
I think Miller will probably be available at 24. So I think it would be him, and then like I say, you'd probably move Titus Howard over to left tackle. I feel like the people are all over the place on the 2 guys, the 2 Utah tackles. Lomu and Fano, I've heard people saying kind of late first round for both. So potentially one of them. I can't see Miller and both of them being there, but I could maybe see one of them. So I think that's your dream scenario. I think if you were to go wide receiver first, if you were to go offensive tackle first, then, like I say, I'm assuming that Tyson will be gone by then, based on what we've heard now. I think the top 4 receivers will probably be gone by then. So then, Cooper or Hurst, I don't think Hurst will go that high. So you might be able to get him in the second. So maybe Cooper. I'm not sure. I've heard people saying the Browns love Jeremy Bernard from Alabama, but I wouldn't want to take him at 24.
No.
So I think it's one of those where I think if you go offensive tackle at 6, there's a part of me, and this probably does also apply if you go wide receiver, you've got to be willing to expect that there is a decent chance that you will have no players worth taking at the other spot at 24. And that might be fine because I think, like I say, both of those, especially wide receiver, top of the second round, you can probably get someone. So it might be offensive tackle, then a different position, then wide receiver at the top of the second.
Yeah, and I think that's why EMW probably makes sense there. Just kind of as you said, like if you are in that position where it's like, well, we went wide receiver first. We don't feel great about these tackles at 24. Let's just take EMW if he's there, or vice versa. You kind of feel that kind of same way about it. And as I said, I mean, I think that just shows you the value differences really. And as someone that do you feel better at wide receiver at 6? 24, and obviously those guys, you're much higher on conception than a lot of people, so obviously you would assume that he would be gone by 24. I would be sat there, hoping that he would be there at 24, so that's kind of, I suppose, where the difference is there for me. But as I said, the best value I think the Browns can get in this draft is get that trade back with Dallas, get 12, 20 and 24, and just throw as many things at those positions as you can. Before I let you go, please let everyone know where they can find you on social media, and of course where they can find the touchdown and all of that stuff that you do amazing work for.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on again. You can find me at Jack_BRENTNALL on Twitter. My pinned post is the draft guide that we've done for the touchdown. So it's 700 and something pages, 230 prospects, all sorts of stuff in there. So that's my pinned post, and then I've just posted my top 100 big board. And there'll be a mock draft from me next week. I'm doing a draft mailbag as well next week. So, check out my Twitter or the touchdown.co.uk, which is where most of my work is.
Yeah, and as I said, I can't vouch enough for the work that Jack does, and especially the touchdown as well. That draft guide, as I said, is one of the best draft guides out there, and that's saying something with how many draft guides are out there, and most of them are charging a lot of money for them, considering what and the touchdowns, as I said, is well within anyone's price range, and for what it is, I think is an absolute bargain. So shout out to you, shout out to the touchdown for all the work that you do. As I said, thanks again so much for coming on, and enjoy the draft as much as you can as a Packers fan, and B, a draft guy that, as we kind of spoke off camera, gets to watch this draft with a bit more excitement for these day 2, day 3 guys than maybe everyone else. But thanks again, Jack, and have a great rest of your evening.